It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna, the first ever, I think it's the first ever, rain out edition of Rico Brogna. Who's stunned by this? Who's stunned by the fact that the Mets and the Braves are not playing game 2 of a 3-game series? But it is official. It took them a while, but Major League Baseball and the Atlanta Braves finally realized that there will be no baseball at Truist Park on Wednesday night. And subsequently, there will be no baseball on Thursday night at Truist Park. And the Mets-Braves series, originally scheduled to be 3 games, is just a 1-game series. And now we wait for 2 days before the Mets go to Milwaukee. Atlanta waits for the Kansas City Royals to get to town. And now hanging over all of us is the cloud that we started to kind of talk about and start to think about 24 hours ago. And that is the cloud of a doubleheader. And that has been confirmed by Major League Baseball. If the games are needed for playoff purposes, the New York Mets will continue their season 1 extra day and play a doubleheader. Are you freaking kidding me? A doubleheader against the Atlanta Braves, potentially with the season on the line. During the day, where most of us work, and there may be 2 games. Now, my brain has already gone into overdrive thinking about all the different scenarios, the scenarios where the Mets have already clinched going into Monday, the scenarios where they only need to win 1 time on Monday, the scenarios where they've got to win 2 times on Monday, the scenarios where they win and they clinch, but then they still have to play a second game, and vice versa. I'm telling you, there are a million different ways this could fall. And so I'm trying to use the best logic on how the Mets should handle this moving forward, because we could sit here and spend our time on the Rico Brogna complaining about Major League Baseball and complaining about the Atlanta Braves and talking about how they should have had foresight on this. But the truth is, it's done now. There's no neutral site. There's no moving it up. It is what it is. It was 1 game against the Braves. It went horribly wrong. And now the Mets have to recoup, and they've got to figure out what they should do pitching-wise for these 3 games against Milwaukee and then potentially the 2 games against the Braves. First of all, I want this thing absolutely done by the time we get to Monday. And it's possible. I'm not going to tell you it's likely, but it's possible. Let's start with the Arizona angle. The Arizona angle, which is that the Mets go into Monday, which means they conclude Sunday, mathematically clinching over the Arizona Diamondbacks. The way to do that, it's very simple, is to have 2 fewer losses than the Diamondbacks by the time we close business late Sunday afternoon. If that's the case, the Mets have clinched. They have the tiebreaker on Arizona, which is such a reminder of how important that game was, the final game of the series with the Diamondbacks after Edwin Diaz gave up the grand slam to Corbin Carroll. Now looking back on it, having the full season, 157 games, whatever they've played so far, to look back at everything, that was the most important game of the year. It really was. Think about how different everything would be if they didn't have the tiebreaker on the Arizona Diamondbacks, but they do. And right now, the Mets have 1 fewer loss than Arizona. The Diamondbacks are playing late on Wednesday night. We are doing this, Rico, early Wednesday night. So we don't know how Arizona's going to do against San Francisco. But if they lose this game, then all the Mets have to do is win 3 against Milwaukee, and it's over. Doesn't mean they won't have to play Monday, but at least if they play Monday, it won't mean anything. More on that later, on how you handle games that don't mean anything that you're forced to play. But if they can finish the regular season with 2 fewer losses than the Arizona Diamondbacks, it is over. If the Braves finish the regular season with 2 fewer losses than the Arizona Diamondbacks, that's over too, because the Braves have the tiebreaker on Arizona as well. And why that matters is there is a scenario, and it really involves the Diamondbacks collapsing, which they're doing. They've lost 3 in a row. They blew the 8-0 lead on Sunday. Like, they're contributing to it. They do have 3 games against San Diego starting Friday. They have 1 more against the Giants, trying to avoid being swept by San Francisco. But if the Diamondbacks are just going to lose, then problem solved. There's a chance they don't have to play Monday. And I've said this before, I am under the impression that the Mets and the Braves would not play for playoff seeding. They would play for a playoff spot, but it would not be done for seeding. And so if the Braves and the Mets could have a postseason wrapped up, a postseason spot wrapped up by the time Sunday afternoon is done, they're not playing Monday. And that is a best case scenario for everybody. As much as I can't stand the Atlanta Braves, as much as, hey, in a perfect world, the Braves are going home too, selfishly, and I think we all need to be selfish as Met fans, if the Braves making the playoffs makes this easier for us where we don't have to see them again, unless it's a National League Championship Series, then fine. I'll take my chances, even though that may end badly. Then go Braves. Finish the job. Make the postseason. Now, that will not get me to root for Atlanta over the weekend because my focus, and I think all of our focus should be just make the playoffs. And there is a scenario where the Mets are 3 games ahead of Atlanta, and if they're 3 games ahead of Atlanta, the Braves can't catch the Mets. So one of the other clinching scenarios, besides having 2 fewer losses than the Arizona Diamondbacks at the close of business on Sunday, is since the Mets and Braves have played the same amount of games, it's easy to talk about this, to be 3 games ahead. If they are 2 games ahead, well, then Atlanta beats them twice on Monday. They're tied. Braves have the tiebreaker. So the magic number in terms of eliminating Atlanta, or at least clinching a playoff spot that way, would be to be 3 games ahead of Atlanta. How do you do that? You got to gain 2 games on them. That means the Mets would have to sweep the Brewers and the Braves would have to lose 2 out of 3, or the Mets win 2 out of 3 and the Braves get swept by the Kansas City Royals. We are familiar with other teams, specifically teams from Missouri, doing our dirty work to take out the Braves when we can't. If we're being honest, because that's exactly what happened in 2000, and I have no regrets. I said this on the air, and I believe this. We could do a whole Rico about this. I don't think the Mets in 2000 beat the Atlanta Braves, and I have no regrets that the St. Louis Cardinals took them out. So you've got a lot of scenarios where the Mets could have a playoff spot wrapped up. The other piece of good news to kind of digest is no matter how bad things go in Milwaukee, the worst case scenario, if you will, the Mets get swept, the Braves sweep the Royals. I know that sounds horrific and sickening, but I'm just walking you through the worst case scenario to know what that means for us. The Mets would still get another crack on Monday because under that crazy scenario, how crazy is it, of the Mets getting swept by Milwaukee and the Braves sweeping Kansas City and the Mets falling 2 games behind the Braves, they would get 2 games with them on Monday. And if they won both games, they'd finish in a tie and would get the tiebreaker. So there is no scenario where the Mets are eliminated before they get their last gasp on Monday in Atlanta. Now, no one wants to be in that scenario. No one wants to be staring 2 games against the Braves where they have to win both. That is the worst case scenario. I don't want it. I'm not expecting it. But that is the worst of worst case scenarios where we go into Monday knowing, hey, we still got a shot, but it means sweeping a doubleheader against the Atlanta Braves. So a lot of scenarios. And I think as we get closer, even tonight with Arizona taking on San Francisco, then Arizona doesn't play on Thursday. So it's a quiet day on Thursday where we can just focus on Giants Cowboys, if you will. But once we get towards the weekend, the picture will become a little bit more clearer. Right now, the Mets do not control their destiny in terms of clinching before Monday. Even if they won all 3 games against Milwaukee, if Arizona picks themselves up and Atlanta plays well, the Mets still may be forced to have to win games on Monday against the Braves. So those are all the scenarios. And yeah, there are scenarios where the Mets play on Monday and it doesn't matter to them, but it matters to Atlanta. And I think there are some major negatives that Major League Baseball has to figure out around that. If this was 10 years ago, and obviously 10 years ago, we would have 1-game playoffs, which would add even more complications to this. But 10 years ago, rosters would expand to 40. And so in a hypothetical where the Mets are in the playoffs, but they have to play a game because the Braves need to determine if they're in the playoffs, the Mets would have 37 guys on their roster. And so you could pitch a ton of guys that would never be on the postseason roster. And you could even play a handful of position players that wouldn't be on your postseason roster. And so being in a situation where you have to play a meaningless game the day before you open up the postseason wouldn't be end of the world stuff. But because of the rosters in 2024 and the fact that the expansion of rosters only takes you to 28, and you can't start optioning guys to the minor leagues. I don't think that's an option, because then when you create your wild card series roster, I think there are complications. You got to play your guys. We got a lot of emails we're going to go through about, hey, can you call a bunch of guys up? Can you sit everybody? You can't sit everybody. You would be forced literally to have to play most of your regulars. Obviously you'd be smart with certain guys like Francisco Lindor, but you may be forced to have to play your regular guys in a game that doesn't matter, and then the following day have to fly to San Diego, LA, or Milwaukee. I call that a first world problem, because if we're talking about the playoffs and the Mets have made it, I don't know about you guys, I'm going to be so freaking happy. I'm not going to get nuts over who has to play on a Monday afternoon when the Mets are going to the postseason. I do believe Major League Baseball should do the right thing and move back the start of the wild card series in those affected series. It's not that complicated to do. Right now, the playoff schedule has every wild card series on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then whatever's necessary in a winner-take-all Game 3 on Thursday. If you move everything back a day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was an off day anyway. You may not need Friday, depending on how the wild card series goes, and you go from there. Major League Baseball has given no indication they're going to do that. Major League Baseball has also been awful in this process. They have not been communicative at all. It feels like they've allowed the Atlanta Braves to dictate this and not tell them, hey, there's a hurricane coming. People's lives are in danger. The governor has called a state of emergency. Maybe we should move to a neutral site. And I don't blame the Braves for being pigs. The Braves as an organization can be as selfish as they want. They can be gamesmanships all day on the Mets. I would want to do the same thing to them. I hate the Atlanta Braves. If they hate us, God's fine. What I have a problem with is the lack of leadership from Major League Baseball. Rob Manfred is a feckless leader. He could have shown some stones and said, I respect your gates. I respect you don't want to do it. You're going to do it. And we're going to move these games to a neutral site because we don't want baseball being played on a Monday afternoon before the playoffs start. Now let's get to the rotation. So yesterday on the Rico, my initial reaction, and I said this also on the air with Tiki, is to hold off on Sean Manaea. I am taking that back. I think Mendoza's right to pitch him Friday, and I'll tell you why. As important as the Atlanta games may be, like pull the fire alarm in case of emergency, if you start Manaea on a Friday, which are also important games, there are scenarios where Monday doesn't matter. And while that's not the end-all be-all, the end-all be-all is making the postseason, I like the idea of trying to respond after that awful loss to Atlanta and 2 days off with using your best starting pitcher in Sean Manaea. But the other benefit, and Mendy pointed this out quickly after the game got rained out, is that if he pitches Friday, he would also be in line to pitch on Wednesday. We talked about this years ago in the DeGrom Scherzer San Diego series. I was a huge fan of holding off my best pitcher until Game 2 of the wild card series. I did not think that was arrogant by Buck. I thought that critique was lazy to say it was arrogant. It was not. It's actually great strategy. Sean Manaea has become the Mets' best starting pitcher. And having him pitch on Wednesday, which would be Game 2 of a wild card series, you're putting yourself in a position where he's pitching in that series. And if you win Game 1, you may not have to pitch him in Game 2. You could hold him back for a potential Game 3 if you've already taken Game 1. And if you lose Game 2, he's good to go in a winner-take-all game. Now, that scenario becomes a little bit more complicated because of the pitching with all of this, because of the fact that you may have to play 5 games in 4 days. But as important as the Atlanta series is, I think my initial reaction is wrong. I own that. I would start Manaea Friday, set the tone for the Milwaukee series, win the freaking game, and if you're in the playoffs, which is the goal, he's able to come back as soon as possible. So I think Mendy's right about that. Now, as far as the rest of the rotation is concerned, here's my thinking on this. I think Game 2 should be Tyler McGill. Now, I think you also need to play it by ear on what's happening, on what Arizona's done, on what you did on Friday. I don't know if Mendy feels like he needs to lay the schedule out, but keep this in mind about Tyler McGill. The Mets may have to play 5 games that matter in 4 days. That means everybody in the rotation is going to have to pitch. When do you want to pitch Tyler McGill? Would you want to pitch him in Atlanta? Probably not. Would you want to pitch him in game 162? You could. But I like Luis Severino making that start. I am not in love with Severino facing the Braves again. The Braves may be in love with Spencer Schwellenbach facing us again. I don't love the idea of Severino facing the same team twice. He has done that once this season. It didn't go badly. Full disclosure, he did it against the Phillies actually recently, where he made back-to-back starts against the Phillies, and his line was exactly the same, 6 innings, 3 runs. But I don't love showing that lineup the same stuff, having Jorge Soler see the same sliders over and over again. And Sevy's 5th day is Sunday, game, I was going to say 162. It's not. Game 160, I guess it is. So the way I would piece it together is I would go Manaea Friday, McGill Saturday, knowing I'm probably going to have to pitch him anyway, Severino on Sunday. That would set me up in Atlanta with Jose Quintana and David Peterson. The negative is, and we talked about this leading up to the Atlanta series, Quintana does not have a lot of great individual numbers against Atlanta. But what are your options? If you're like me and you don't want to pitch Severino a second time, then you're not pitching Severino a second time. Are you comfortable with McGill? Or do you say, screw it, let me throw my best starters back to back to back to back, with the plan being and the hope being I don't have to pitch a 5th guy in the second game of the doubleheader. And if I do and the game doesn't matter, let it be Tyler McGill. There's no easy answer to this, by the way. Like, what is the answer? Maybe you go best starters and you say Manaea, Peterson, and hold off on a decision on Sunday to see if it's a clincher or not. If Sunday's a clincher and you know you win and that's it and it's over, maybe you hold off on Tyler McGill and you go for it. But my gut right now, card subject to change because this is also unique and new, is I was wrong about Manaea. I would start him Friday. I think Mendy's right. I go Manaea, McGill, Severino, and I hold off with David Peterson and Jose Quintana for the 2 games against Atlanta.
Well, a couple things. First of all, I know that the rain has screwed this whole thing up, but am I wrong to say that this pitching rotation would have been a headache regardless going into the playoffs, no matter what? Because, again, we're still sitting here going, all right, where do we play Manaea? We still need to get into the playoffs, no?
Yeah, so the original plan, my understanding of the original plan is Manaea and Peterson would have pitched the last 2 games against Atlanta, and the series against Milwaukee was going to be Jose Quintana, Tyler McGill, and Luis Severino. That was the plan, which is not that far off from what I'm even suggesting. And then there was no game 163 or rescheduled game for Monday, and you would have, for the opener of the postseason, Sean Manaea ready to go. And it would be however you kind of want to line it up. So the rotation was going to be Quintana, McGill, and Severino, only if you needed Severino in game 162. Because, again, if the Mets had clinched, they would have held back on Severino, basically had a bullpen day of all the guys you don't trust, Danny Young, Alex Young, Adam Ottavino, Ryan Stanek, all those guys. And then for the postseason, depending on your matchup, you would have had your full allotment to choose from. That's gone. And the other thing that's gone, Pete, that's really dangerous, is if the Mets are forced to have to use all 5 of those guys I mentioned in 4 days, and the playoffs begin on Tuesday, they would not have a starting pitcher on regular rest for game 1 of the wild card series. Not one. And I don't know what they would do, to be perfectly honest with you. I haven't heard an update on Paul Blackburn. I guess he could just appear magically. Kodai Senga's no longer a factor. So unless they're pitching someone on short rest, which in this case would be Manaea if he's pitching Friday, and you probably don't want to do that, you'd rather have him on his full rest, the Mets wouldn't have a starter for game 1 of the wild card series. That's where they would really feel this, because before that, Pete, these 3 against Milwaukee, the potential 2 against Atlanta, they have 5 guys. There's been 2 off days with rain. Like, those 5 guys in the rotation can all pitch. It's a matter of determining when. Where you get effed is game 1 of the wild card series. Wouldn't have any.
All right. So here's now bear with me here, because it's creative. And a lot of people don't do creative, especially in baseball. We can't do creative. Go ahead.
All ears, baby.
So first of all, if what was your position doubleheader on Monday? You want Quintana first or Peterson to go first? What was your order?
Okay, so I didn't answer that. I'll answer that now since you asked it. It would depend on the situation.
Okay.
Now, I think Quintana and Peterson are very close, but I guess I'd give Peterson the edge slightly based on the matchups, based on Quintana's struggles against a lot of Atlanta hitters. But there isn't a great difference. Like if you held back, let's say Sean Manaea and Tyler McGill, well, then it's obvious. Like if you just need one win, you may go McGill with the conservative factor of, hey, break glass in case of emergency. If you have to win both games, you're going to go with your best starter. So I think a lot of it depends on what's the scenario on Monday. Is it they need to win twice? Is it they need to win once? Because I think that matters.
So if they only have to win once, what is your order?
If I'd probably lean towards Peterson making the start because I like if they have to win once. Honestly, It doesn't matter because...
Well, it does. Don't say that. It does matter.
The only reason I say it doesn't matter, Pete, is that I'm thinking about... I don't know who the next round's opponent would be and who I would feel better about starting that first game. Because if you only need to win once and you win, then whoever was scheduled to start the second game pitches game one of the wild card series.
Exactly. But who would you prefer, Quintana or Peterson? I think at this point in time, I know that Quintana's been brilliant, but I think at this point in time, I'd almost say Peterson is the better bet because, A, we know that Quintana versus the Braves has not been good. So he's kind of like your backup plan. If Quintana has a bad game, all right, then we'll go to Peterson game 2. Hopefully he locks it down. And then we're in the playoffs and we move on to next. If not, Peterson, I don't almost trust in that game 1 start if Quintana does his job.
The problem, and there's so many problems with all of these ideas. The problem with Quintana being held back for Atlanta is he's going to go like 2 weeks without pitching. I mean, so think about the last time Quintana pitched because they skipped him. They were skipping him in this Atlanta series to then pitch Friday, and now he's not going to pitch Friday because Manaea is going to pitch Friday, which leads me to think. I'm starting to think. I think Mendy, not what I would do. I'm trying to project Carlos Mendoza. I think he's going to go Manaea Quintana Friday, Saturday. I don't know what he does Sunday. Maybe it depends on the situation. Maybe if they have a chance to clinch, he goes for the jugular with Luis Severino, which means then you'd have David Peterson and Tyler McGill. Can you believe that? With the 2 games in Atlanta. Imagine telling somebody that 3-4 months ago. Oh, yeah. They're going to play a doubleheader in Atlanta, and the 2 starters are going to be David Peterson and Tyler McGill. But I get the sense Quintana's going to pitch this weekend. I think he's going to go Manaea Quintana Friday, Saturday, go TBD on Sunday, depending on the scenario. Do you agree that you would prefer not to have Severino back in Atlanta, or does that not bother you as much?
I mean, the way he pitched on Tuesday, yeah. I mean, I don't want to pitch him again in Atlanta, but I don't think that'll happen again. I think that he just had a really bad game. It was very shaky. There was a lot of things that went wrong. It wasn't just how he pitched. It was everything. It was the way people fielded. So it was a culmination of everything. I don't feel as bad if he doubles down.
All right, let me get to a lot of your emails. There's a lot of opinions on the rotation. There's also a lot of opinions that the rainout was good. And I'll tell you one guy who texted me immediately to say, this is a great break for the Mets. And it's Benigno.
Oh.
Joe said, this is the best news for the Mets. And his rationale was he doesn't want to play the Braves. And the thought is he thinks the Mets have a better chance of just finishing the job this weekend, considering Arizona struggling. And despite the Met issues with the Brewers earlier this season, more confidence that they would be able to beat Milwaukee than beat Atlanta. And look, the one thing I'll share with him on this, and I think a lot of us feel this way, it's very tough to be confident against the Braves. I'm sorry. It just is. And that's not being overly dramatic to one game. I think it's being overly dramatic to the fact that we've seen the Braves beat our ass for 1,000,000 years, including 2 years ago when the team collapsed. So the idea that they don't have to worry about the Braves till Monday and it's just going through Milwaukee, I can see why that appeals to people. The reason I don't love it is I'm thinking about the possibilities of a doubleheader on a Monday after the season's over against that team that they never beat. But let's get to some of your emails. Igor writes, this is just crazy. I know we talked about all the normal scenarios where the Braves have to win 1 or 2 to make it, or the Mets have to win 1 or both to make it. But what about these 2? Scenario 1, Mets have to win just 1 game to make it over Arizona. The Braves also have to win 1 game to make it over Arizona. If the Mets win the first game, do we just say screw it and bench everybody? So I guess a scenario like that would be the Mets, the Braves, and the Diamondbacks all have the same amount of losses. Okay? They all have the same amount of losses after the end of the regular season. Obviously, Arizona at that point would have more wins, but they have the same amount of losses. Both the Mets and the Braves have the tiebreaker on Arizona, which means Arizona needs somebody to lose. Actually, wait a second. I don't even think that works. I don't think that's the scenario that works, because if they all have the same amount of losses and one team loses, that team has one more loss than Arizona. Arizona's in. Yeah. Boy, this is so goddamn confusing. I'm trying to think of the scenario on how it would have to play out for what he mentioned, where the Mets, the Braves, and the Diamondbacks. All right, I think I have it. Let's go with that. They all have the same amount of losses. The loser, if they all have the same amount of losses and the Braves beat the Mets are out. And then it's over. And then Arizona's in. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of how that scenario would work, where the Mets win and then the Diamondbacks are still in it. It's so good. You know what? I need a whole night to write this stuff down to really come down with it. Anyhow, scenario number 2, Igor writes about. Mets need to win both games over the Braves for Arizona to make it. Do the Mets just lose the first game on purpose so they don't even have to play a second game? Hold on, I got to think about that scenario. So the Mets are already in. The Braves are, let's say, oh my God. Pete, this is so confusing. I'm usually so good with these scenarios, but I got to tell you, I think I need a whole night, and maybe the fact the Mets aren't playing will make it easier. I think I need a whole night to devour the Diamondback scenarios with both Mets and the Braves. I've already figured out the Mets Braves scenarios. Those are kind of easy. But when you include the Diamondbacks and you try to figure out okay, everybody's still alive or one team's still alive, and then based on the outcome of the first game of the doubleheader, there's another game, but it only impacts one team. I got to tell you, my head starts to really, really spin. I'm going to work on this tonight, though, by the way.
I just blacked out, dude. I have no. By the way, so the Diamondbacks playing again tonight, though, right?
Arizona's playing San Francisco tonight. The Diamondbacks right now, at this moment, have one more loss than the New York Mets and the same amount of losses as the Atlanta Braves. The easiest way to think about this is how many losses do the Diamondbacks have, because you can't make up the loss column. You can make up the win column.
Okay. Still lost.
No. What I'm going to do is, I promise you this. I guess I can't really promise this. If I can't sleep tonight, I am going to jot down, and it'll help after the Arizona plays on Wednesday night, because then it'll just be 3 Diamondback games left, so it's easy to kind of figure out the scenarios. All the different scenarios of what would happen this weekend and what the doubleheader would mean in terms of they have to play both. There's only one. If the Mets win, this happens. If the Braves win, that happens. Because are there scenarios where the Mets win, make a playoff spot, but then still have to play a second game because they've got to determine the Arizona-Atlanta situation?
Hold on. I thought that there was, I thought I read something, maybe I was wrong, that there's not a guarantee that the Mets and Braves will have to play for seeding. Is that true? Yeah.
So if both the Mets and the Braves have playoff spots wrapped up on Sunday because the Diamondbacks collapse, they are not playing those 2 games. They are not going to play games for seeding purposes. They're only going to play games for playoff purposes. That's where things are a little bit easier. It's just very difficult to figure out the scenarios. But I will. That is my mission this evening. I will figure it out. Adam writes, the weather gods smile on the Mets. Evan, I think this is the best thing that could happen to the Mets. They can leave Atlanta with their psyche intact, set up pitching for the Brewers, and maybe just come back to Atlanta up 2 games. Plus, Lindor gets more rest. Who felt good about tonight's game versus Chris Sale? Let's be honest. They dodged a bullet. Let's hope they man up and take care of business against the Brewers, who really have nothing to play for. What I will give you, where I will agree with you, is I think the worst case scenario that the Mets had was playing the game on Wednesday, tonight, like this game happening, and then Thursday being rained out. And the reason I thought that was the worst case scenario is I agree with Adam. This was a tough matchup having to face Chris Sale, even though the Braves gave him an extra day and there seems to be some level of concern with Chris Sale based on the amount of innings he's thrown and maybe wearing down a little bit, but we'll see. But you face Chris Sale, then you're set up to face him again on Monday because that's exactly what Atlanta would have been set up to do. They would have been set up to pitch Chris Sale today and then have him come back on regular rest on Monday. And so the Mets would have to have faced Chris Sale twice in a 3-game series, essentially, even though it was split apart. So I thought that was the worst case scenario. I think the best case scenario would have been to play the games. Like straight up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's how the rotation was set. You had Shaw Benaya pitching the finale just in case they lost the first 2 games. And even if you won that last game, you knew go to Milwaukee, take care of business. Even after losing a series to Atlanta, you can still make the playoffs. I think when you add this kind of jumble and the idea of a doubleheader and these weird decisions on how to handle your rotation, which includes Minaya not facing Atlanta, like that's out if Mendy's going to pitch him on Friday. That was my hesitation towards pitching him on Friday. You are not using him against the team you may have to beat. So I don't agree that it's a benefit. Joe thought the same thing. I don't buy it. Now, if they go out and they sweep the Brewers and the Diamondbacks get tripped up and they never have to play Atlanta or they never have to play Atlanta with anything on the line, I would probably look back on it and say, boy, you guys were right. But at this moment, I don't feel that way. Ian Nolan thinks that as well, or thinks what our last emailer said, which is the rain is good. I know a lot of fans are pissed tonight's game was rained out, but this could be a blessing in disguise. If tonight's game was played, we'd have to beat Chris Sale, the presumptive NL Cy Young winner, and there's a good chance we would have faced Sale on Monday afternoon on regular rest. Now, Sale likely goes over the weekend, and the Mets miss him completely. This is a huge benefit to us. Did any fan feel good about beating Chris Sale once, let alone twice? Additionally, it gives Lindor 2 more days to heal up, and if we are up a game on Arizona come Sunday night, which seems possible if not likely, Monday would only matter for seedings. Well, they'd have to be, I guess technically they'd be a game up. They need to be 2 up in the loss column, is my understanding. Because if they're not, they can lose games and have Arizona jump them. Like if they have 1 fewer loss than Arizona, they're in danger of losing 2 games to Atlanta and then falling behind them. So the key is being 2 losses ahead of them. Connor writes, if the Mets clinch on Sunday. If the Mets clinch in Milwaukee, they should just stay in Milwaukee and forfeit the doubleheader and take the 6th seed. It's ridiculous to fly back to Atlanta for a doubleheader unless we absolutely have to win to get in. The most likely path to clinching this weekend is taking 2 of 3 in Milwaukee and Arizona losing 2 of their last 4. Diamondbacks play the Giants and then 3 with San Diego. If the Mets and Padres can both win their series, it won't matter what Atlanta does against the Royals. Go Mets, go Padres. If it matters to Atlanta and Arizona, they still have to play the games. And you can't forfeit it, as Connor suggested, because that's not fair to the Arizona Diamondbacks, and they'll never allow that. You're going to have to put a lineup together. You're going to have to play a game. Guys may not care. It would feel unfair for a team that's relying on your help. But if this game matters to Atlanta and it doesn't matter to the Mets, which, by the way, I'd sign for right now. I mean, would we all sign for that? As much of a pain in the ass as it is to play a game in Atlanta that doesn't mean anything to us, I would still sign for it because remember, you don't have to pitch anybody. Like there's no rule that you've got to start someone of consequence. You're not. You're going to hold back whatever fresh starter you decided to hold off on to pitch in the wild card series. You could go with Adam Ottavino for 2 innings, Danny Young for 2 innings, Alex, and that's what they do. And you can't blame the Mets for doing that because you got to put the best interest of your team first. What Connor also pointed out was go Padres. It is important now for the Padres to still be in on the NL West because as soon as they're out on the NL West with a playoff spot wrapped up, they're not going to care against the Diamondbacks. They're going to be thinking about, we're in the playoffs, who cares? Right now, they're going for the NL West. There's a big prize in winning the NL West, which is likely a first-round bye. So if you're the San Diego Padres or if you're the Mets and we want the Padres to be motivated going into that weekend against the Diamondbacks, they have to keep winning. Paul writes, the fans need to purge the demons. I think this Mets season has taught me maybe the fans are the problem. Earlier this year, I categorized the Mets as the most unlikable team I've ever watched, and even, dare I say, uttered the phrase, blow it up. While I maintain they were extremely unlikable, what I didn't realize was during that time, there was an actual culture being built. I think as fans, we need to forgive and move on from the past mistakes of this franchise and not take it out on Cohen Stearns. Like a recovery from a toxic past relationship, if you carry that burden to you onto the next one, you'll never fully enjoy the present. It sounds like I'm with a therapist right now, but I appreciate it, Paul. We owe it to this team to believe they'll make the postseason regardless if they lose or win this series against Atlanta. This was before it got canned. I'm confident because I finally think the winning culture is beginning to be built. This is not the same franchise we grew up being disappointed in. They've rose to every challenge that's been put in front of them. God forbid we poison this team because we can't get over the past. Well, I appreciate the message, Paul. I don't believe that me being nervous about Atlanta or anybody in our audience feeling deja vu against Atlanta is poisoning the New York Mets and impacting them right now. Okay? They have to be the ones to unpoison us. They have to be the ones to prove they can beat the Atlanta Braves, assuming they need to beat the Atlanta Braves, as we've gone over. But I'm not going to change my attitude based on, well, they've had a great regular season. They've earned that. They haven't beaten the Braves when it matters. And what I went on a lot about last night on the Rico, and I stand by this, is I am so sick and tired of everybody positioning the 2022 New York Mets as a team that you could see it coming. Yeah, they didn't have fun together. They were tense. You could feel the collapse coming. Did you really feel the collapse coming? They were winning over 100 games. Even the September where they didn't play well, it's not like they were collapsing. They were playing averagely. They had what should have been a fresh Max Scherzer. They had what should have been a fresh Jacob deGrom. And so I keep getting annoyed that we're reinventing what happened 2 years ago to explain why we have confidence in this team. This team has had a great year so far. They got to seal the deal. That's the bottom line. They got to seal the deal. And if they don't seal the deal, then nothing was different. Isn't that really what it comes down to? Oh, man. This is going to be a very hectic next couple of days. I'm preparing myself mentally for all of this. I'm preparing myself really mentally for Monday. The idea that the Mets season may come down to a doubleheader in which selfishly I'm going to be on the radio while the Mets are playing 2 games with their season on the line. I don't know, Hoff. It sounds actually like the most depressing thing I've ever done.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you, man. You're going to be on the air for 2 games, and then you're going to get off. Are you going to do a drive home Rico?
There will be a Rico. I'm probably leaning towards just doing it at the WFAN studios as soon as the show is over, or maybe turning it into a Rico. I don't know. I am planning on some kind of watch party while we're on the air. I'm putting some things together, which, of course, you're more than welcome to stop by for. So for those that wanted a live Rico Brogna watch party for a playoff game, you may get a preview of that. Not a Rico, technically, but an Evan and Tiki live watch party as the Mets are playing games against the Atlanta Braves. But I hold out hope. I really do. I hold out hope that they are not going to matter, that the Mets can respond to this one bad loss to Atlanta, win the games they're supposed to against Milwaukee. And I do say supposed to because the Mets are playing for everything and the Brewers pretty much are not playing games that matter, that they could take care of business, get a tiny bit of help on the Arizona end of things, and clinch this thing on Sunday, or dare I say Saturday. And then Monday, even if they have to play, is not the stressed environment that we're probably projecting right now.
I mean, that would be incredible. But again, it's the Mets. And that's what we're trying to get away from. But it is the Mets. I mean, literally, if things go the way that they're not supposed to go, the Mets are on a platform all by themselves where it's either going to be everyone's going to see this special team highlighted, or it's going to be back to the LOL Mets.
Yeah. Well, getting swept of a doubleheader by the Atlanta Braves on a Monday afternoon would be very LOL, and that's why they got to find a way to avoid it. The good news is, if you want to believe it, the Mets posted a lineup for Tuesday's game. For Wednesday's game, the game that was supposed to be played but got rained out, and it did include Francisco Lindor in the leadoff spot. I said this at the time on the air. I would not have played Lindor in a rainstorm. Like, if the Mets somehow were playing this game tonight because Major League Baseball said, screw it, find a way to play in the midst of a rainstorm, I don't think it was a good idea for Francisco Lindor to play. Now, luckily, not an issue. Game got rained out. He's got 2 more days to rest before Friday night in Milwaukee. But if you believe that lineup, and it wasn't just, hey, let's show Lindor in the lineup, we know we're not playing, it definitely feels like we're going to get Francisco Lindor. Now, can he play 5 games in 4 days? Can he play all 3 games in Milwaukee? I think it's going to be an inning-by-inning thing. But it's definitely a good sign that he took BP the other day. It's a great sign that he was in the lineup. And I agree that with the lineup that Mendy put together, I was surprised Nimmo wasn't in it. Nimmo was not in the lineup against Chris Sale. It's irrelevant. I don't think they're going to see Chris Sale. We'll see what Atlanta does with their rotation against Kansas City. But I agree with Acuna coming off the bench. And I've been saying that for a few days. I like what he's done. He's been a nice addition. He's done a yeoman's work filling in for Lindor. I don't think the Mets should mess around by playing him at second and moving Iglesias to third, putting him in the outfield. I think you got to go back to what got you here. Lindor is the shortstop. Acuna is a valuable piece off the bench in case Lindor gets hurt again, or as a pinch runner off the bench. And they're going to face Frankie Montas on Friday night, a right-hander. I think that'll be interesting to see if they go back to J.D. Martinez. J.D. Martinez was supposed to be in this lineup against Chris Sale. Do they go to their left-handed lineup with Jesse Winker DHing? Do you play Jesse Winker in right field? Sit Starling Marte and have J.D. Martinez. There's a part of me that's curious that J.D. Martinez, even though he has not had a great year, and I've seen all the comparisons to his numbers versus Daniel Vogelbach, how Daniel Vogelbach has basically put up very similar numbers to J.D. Martinez. J.D. Martinez has enough of a resume where I'm still intrigued. I'm still curious to see him, to see if he can break out of this slump in the games that matter the most. Now, I mentioned they're facing Frankie Montas. I was looking at the individual numbers to see if anything jumps out at me. There is something that jumps out at me, and it involves Starling Marte. Starling Marte is 5 for 8 against Frankie Montas. Now, not a huge sample size, but 5 for 8 does jump out at you a little bit. J.D. Martinez is 2 for 9. Doesn't really jump out at you one way or the other. Jesse Winker's 2 for 7. The guy with the most experience against Frankie is Francisco Lindor, who's 4 for 11, but obviously he's going to play. So maybe Marte's career numbers are enough to say put him in the lineup. Do you sit Tyrone Taylor? I wouldn't. Despite him having a quiet game against Atlanta, he gets to go back to his stomping grounds. He's mostly played well. So it really comes down to J.D. Martinez versus Jesse Winker. And I think because Winker has cooled off lately, and he too is swinging early in the 9th inning down a bunch of runs, I think right now, as I sit here with all of you on a Wednesday night, I think I go back to J.D. Martinez. I do. I think I start him at DH. I go Marte and right. Excuse me. And I don't play Jesse Winker. That's my gut going into Friday night against Milwaukee. But here we are. Here we are. No game tonight, no game Thursday, and it's off to uncharted territory with the Brewers and the Braves. More thoughts on how they should handle the rotation? Certainly email us, thericob@gmail.com. I will continue to kind of analyze these scenarios, and hopefully I will give you more information on our next edition of Rico Brogna. We continue to Rico every day until this regular season is over. Thank you very much for downloading, subscribing, and watching a rainout theater edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.